Hello, everybody, and good evening. I'm Don Arleth, and welcome to World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw here on TVP World. An unmitigated train wreck resulting in a diplomatic dumpster fire at the White House on Friday has many people pointing fingers at who's to blame. Did President Zelenskyy overplay his hand, or was it all a setup by the Trump administration? A war of words sent the Ukrainian president packing. Zelenskyy is now in London, leaving us all wondering about what's next. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. European leaders react to the heated Trump-Zelenskyy clash in the Oval Office. Greeks take to the streets on the second anniversary of a tragic train crash that killed 57. And Polish mountain climber combines life passion with helping children. Was it a hit job, or did he overplay his hand during Friday's visit of Volodymyr Zelenskyy to the White House? All hell broke loose as the Ukrainian president tried to confront false claims and unfounded insinuations made by Vice President Vance and President Donald Trump at the meeting. The two presidents openly argued in front of reporters. Here are some of the highlights.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't have your playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
The Oval Office has probably never seen scenes like this. The presidents of two allied countries clashed in front of cameras.
This is going to be great television, I will say that.
The argument ignited after the US vice president lauded Trump for engaging in diplomacy with the Russian president. Zelenskyy stood his ground and pointed out the many instances when Vladimir Putin has broken promises and ignored agreements, including during Trump's previous presidency.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
It was clearly visible as the provocation, and you want to believe that it was not specially done, but you cannot skip this feeling.
After the clash, the visit was cut short, as President Zelenskyy was reportedly asked to leave the White House.
I would say it didn't work out exactly great from his standpoint. I think he very much overplayed his hand.
The Ukrainian president later admitted that he regrets what happened at the Oval Office.
I respect American people, and I think that we have to be very open and very honest, and I'm not sure that we did something bad.
The US-Ukraine deal on mineral extraction was left unsigned.
Clearly, the president and the vice president were engaged in public theater, but it's not clear what their objective is because, again, the terms of the deal, aside from the broad 50%, are unclear.
Zelenskyy was accused of being ungrateful in the White House.
Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America.
As other leaders expressed solidarity with Ukraine after the fateful visit to the Oval Office, President Zelenskyy made sure to say thank you to each of them.
European leaders are rallying behind Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy after that explosive Oval Office meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. What was supposed to be a show of diplomacy ended with a shouting match and a rare minerals deal called off.
Since Friday's public row, European leaders have taken to social media to voice their support for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Among them was Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
Dear President Zelenskyy, dear Ukrainian friends, you are not alone.
The president of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has also offered words of support for Zelenskyy and Ukraine.
Your dignity honors the bravery of the Ukrainian people. Be strong, be brave, be fearless. You will never be alone, dear President Zelenskyy. We will continue to work with you for a just and lasting peace.
European leaders remain hopeful that negotiations between the US and Ukraine will resume.
The most important thing is that negotiations and previously made contacts mustn't break. They cannot be dominated by some additional emotional background, because both countries are interested in reaching the agreement.
NATO Secretary General also spoke out about Friday's clash at the White House.
Unfortunate meeting. I think Zelensky should find a way to restore his relationship with President Trump. That is important going forward. But I know as a fact that the American administration is extremely invested in making sure that Ukraine gets to this durable peace. And we have to work on this together. And the Europeans will have to play a role here.
But Europe still has a lot of work ahead.
Messaging on social media is the first step. Real action must take place. I've already touched on it in this particular program, and many times before. I believe the rest of Europe needs to step up in the same way Poland has, and not meet an arbitrary defense spending level as required by their NATO participation, but to raise the defense level spending and to coordinate the defense structures and strategies across Europe.
Voices from as far away as Far East Asia also have expressed support for the war-torn country, in which Russia has been waging war and occupying land since 2014.
South Korea's acting president Hoi Sang-mok says Japan-South Korea cooperation is absolutely necessary after Trump-Zelenskyy White House meeting.
Some American senators have also made strong statements after the heated discussion.
And what we witnessed in the Oval Office was throwing the Ukrainian people under the bus.
But not all leaders are keen on supporting Ukraine and its fight for freedom.
There are some European politicians who are still eager to be more pro-Russian and not to support the joint efforts.
On Saturday, Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico, who makes no secret of his ties to Vladimir Putin's Russia rather than the European Union, also took to X, but presented a starkly different approach to that of his European colleagues.
Slovakia will not support Ukraine either financially or militarily to enable it to continue the war. If others continue to do so, we will respect that.
Also, in a letter to the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán announced that he would not sign the conclusions of next week's European Council summit on EU support for Ukraine. The EU should start direct talks with Russia, he argued. What comes next is hard to predict.
Could this continue to be part of a high-stakes negotiation? It's certainly possible. Zelenskyy apparently balked at the notion that there was an economic agreement between the United States, but that there were no security guarantees. So where does this land? It's not clear. Trump did leave the door open for Zelenskyy to return by basically stating when he can come back, with a condition of being grateful or some such. So it's not as if the door is entirely closed, but where this goes from here is really anyone's guess.
As we go to air, President Zelenskyy and Prime Minister Keir Starmer have met in Downing Street on Saturday afternoon. The meeting comes a day before Keir hosts a summit of European leaders to discuss bringing the war between Ukraine and Russia to an end, as well as wider European defense.
And now let's go to Ukraine to get some reactions to this war of words in the White House. And now we're joined live by our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. So how are people on the street reacting to what happened in Washington?
Well, while European leaders are rallying around President Zelenskyy, the democratically elected leader of Ukraine, many Ukrainians here, whether they have been previously supportive of the president or not, are also rallying around the president, seeing as what they see as an unjustified attack on him by Vice President J.D. Vance and Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Now, we have some voices from regular Ukrainians in Kyiv expressing their opinions about what took place in the Oval Office. Let's take a listen to what they have to say.
The collapse of diplomacy with America is complete. It is also very clear that it was planned. He was deliberately provoked into a conflict, and Zelenskyy, we can agree or disagree with him on some things, support him or not support him, but here he was clearly right.
You can't talk to Trump. He is acting in his own interests. Talking is useless. You have to force him with pressure. That's all there is to it. Congress will tell him something at some point. They've already realized what's happening in the country. Some are starting to oppose him because the policy should be the way it was with Biden, but it's not with this comrade. What Zelenskyy said, that Putin cannot be trusted, this is mildly speaking. We think and we know that not only he cannot be trusted.
It is not Ukraine that is gambling with the Third World War, no. More likely we are being used in this game as a bargaining chip. But we shall overcome, no doubt about that, with or without aid, because we are a nation with a strong spirit.
As you can see there, Ukrainians striking a defiant tone following the scenes of their president getting berated in the Oval Office. Certainly, it's making more people support President Zelenskyy rather than causing the kinds of political disruption that maybe the Kremlin would be hoping for scenes like that. But look, Ukraine's in a difficult position. I think everyone here knows that. But they are hoping that there can be some route out of this. In either case, they continue to support their government and their president at this time. Back to you, Don.
Oz Chatterjee reporting there from Kyiv. Thank you for that report. Now, while the United States purportedly wants to pursue diplomacy and achieve peace in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's war machine continues to terrorize Ukraine's civilian population. Overnight, Russia launched yet another massive drone strike on the country. A number of civilians were killed and residential buildings damaged in several regions throughout the country.
This is what's left of Natalia's house in Odessa region.
There was a siren. I read in Telegram where the missile was flying. We quickly ran to the basement and heard only when it exploded and the windows fell. It saved us.
One person was killed and 3 were injured in the drone attack on the region. Russia launched over 150 attack drones at Ukraine overnight, according to Kyiv's military command. The report adds that over 100 of them were downed by Ukrainian air defenses. One of those which were not neutralized shattered Volodymyr's house and backyard.
There were 2 explosions around 9 a.m. I went to look out the window to see where it was, but I didn't see anything. I turned around to go back and fell straight onto the sofa. The force of the impact was so strong that the glass flew straight at me.
Authorities in Kharkiv say 12 people were wounded in the city during the large-scale attack. That number includes 2 children.
There were hits by 9 Shaheds. They hit a medical facility, a residential building, office buildings, and a road. There was a lot of damage among the residential buildings.
The Ukrainian army has reported 91 clashes on the front line over the past 24 hours, most of them in the Donetsk region. The head of the region's military administration says 4 civilians were killed and 6 others injured by Russian shelling.
Ukrainians are not integrating into European society. Ukrainians refuse to work and take advantage of social services. Ukrainians are spreading fear in Europe. These are just a few of the false narratives that Russian disinformation is actively spreading in Poland and in other European countries. Our reporter Anastasia Yanchenko has the details in this report.
Russian propaganda is trying to convince Europeans that Ukrainian women are stealing their husbands, that Ukrainian refugees are criminals, and that they are living on state aid without contributing to society. It is designed not only to discredit Ukraine, but also to justify Russia's ongoing aggression by creating fear and resentment among local populations.
The message is clear.
Poland is the second most targeted country in Europe, despite its strong efforts to counter the spread of fake news. Some Polish politicians, notably far-right presidential candidate Sławomir Mencen, are incorporating such Russian propaganda into their platforms ahead of the elections in May. More than 1.7 Ukrainians have sought refuge in Poland. This influx has given Russian intelligence services the opportunity to ramp up disinformation efforts and fuel hostility towards Ukrainians. One victim of this disinformation campaign is Irina, who fled Poland after being falsely accused by prosecutors of attacking Moscow's ambassador in Warsaw in 2022, a charge she firmly denies.
I had to become a refugee twice. After this false accusation, I received death threats. People wished me harm, threatened to kill me. In Russia, they opened a criminal case against me and labeled me an extremist. Authorities in Poland tried to help me, but for my own safety, the police advised me to leave the country.
Norway, although home to a significantly smaller Ukrainian refugee population of about 85,000, has also become a target of Russian disinformation. The most outrageous claim came from Russian state media outlets REN TV and the Federal News Agency, which falsely reported that Ukrainian refugees in Norway were being forced into prostitution to survive.
Norway is a country with a very high emphasis on the freedom of speech. And there is also a country where the population is generally, how shall I say, politically conscious. So most of these narratives will be debunked by people themselves, but there are, of course, things that happen on social media that is difficult to reach.
In response to this ongoing information war, Ukrainian organizations from Poland and Norway recently gathered in Warsaw to discuss the impacts of Russian propaganda and how to counter it.
Disinformation thrives on emotion, not facts. We work to provide the truth, real data and evidence. But the problem is, people don't always take the time to fact-check. They don't verify sources. That's why we organize conferences like this, to educate people and help them recognize manipulation.
Over the last decade, at least 18,000 cases of Russian disinformation have been officially recorded in Europe, and the number continues to rise. Experts advise concerned citizens, stay vigilant, trust only verified media sources, don't let disinformation manipulate you.
Thousands of Greeks took to the streets in a nationwide protest demanding justice for the victims of a tragic railway crash that claimed the lives of 57 people. The 2023 accident in which a freight and passenger train collided was the country's deadliest railway disaster.
Nearly 200,000 people gathered outside the Greek parliament in Athens to mark the second anniversary of the horrific 2023 train crash.
2 years later, we are still looking for answers as to what happened and why, and still no one has been held accountable.
This is a crime we won't forget. We want all political and criminal liability to be attributed to all those responsible, and we will do whatever it takes.
I believe that people must not stop demanding justice and respect for their rights. I believe that something has to change in the political scene of the country, and that society must not let this be forgotten.
The protests soon turned violent as protesters set fire to trash cans and hurled gasoline bombs, prompting the riot police to use water cannons, stun guns, and tear gas. More than 80 people were detained and 5 injured in Athens alone. The protesters, however, remained defiant.
Despite the tear gas fired at us, despite the strikes, the protesters won't leave. We are united. We have already won.
We have resisted the waves of tear gas. People are here. We will not let this issue go unpunished.
The 2023 disaster shocked the nation after a train filled with students collided with a freight train, killing 57 people and injuring dozens more. 2 years later, the safety gaps that caused the crash have not been fixed, and the government has yet to launch a parliamentary inquiry into political responsibility for the incident.
And on a lighter note, we now turn to an inspiring story of adventure and giving back. A Polish mountaineer is combining his goal of climbing the highest peak on every continent with a mission to support children in foster care. Aisha Abachi has more.
Mountaineering is often a personal challenge, a test of determination and endurance, but for some, it's also a way to change lives.
Once I told myself that I want to conquer the 7 Summits Challenge, I realized that this is a very difficult task, also in terms of time and determination. You need to have a lot of willpower.
In 2016, Michał began his quest to scale the highest peaks on each continent, but he also wished to contribute to a greater cause.
I combined the project. I call it 7 Happy Summits because the foundation is called Happy Kids. We are climbing together for almost 8 years now. The flag was with me on 7 out of 9 peaks of the 7 Summits Challenge, and now it's going to the Everest.
Every expedition is dedicated to a different cause, and in April, Michał will set out for his biggest challenge yet, Mount Everest.
Everest will be dedicated to the self-care program for the young adults.
The funds raised will provide 41 young people aged 15 and up the opportunity to work with mentors that will help them navigate the basics of adult life.
They need to go outside and live in a real world with problems such as, taxes, daily budget, maintaining apartments. We don't always think about it, but at some point of our lives we are taught by other people how to do it, and they sometimes don't have this occasion.
The foundation cares for around 200 children across 20 family foster houses, and each of which Michał has visited to personally connect with every child.
There are a lot of hidden values and a lot of hidden stories underneath this simple mountaineering expedition, and when the young people hear it, they can learn something about those values.
As he prepares to take on Mount Everest, Michał Lekczyński's mission goes beyond the climb. It's about giving young people the tools to build independent futures. For TVP World, Aisha Badja.
Friday's meeting between President Zelenskyy and the Trump administration in the White House has left both Americans and Europeans disgusted, albeit for different reasons. No matter how you see it, we can already see the very real-life consequences for a country struggling for its very existence. The State Department has already cut off aid for restoring Ukraine's energy grid. Weapons transfers are under consideration, and Republican voices are crying for Zelenskyy's resignation. So what is Europe going to do? That's what we're about to discuss with my guest, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, Elizabeth Braun. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening.
Now, people are split. Some say Zelenskyy overplayed his hand and didn't express gratitude. Others say that this was a hit job and setup of the Ukrainian president at the White House. In your opinion, who is to blame for Friday's train wreck there in the Oval Office?
What seemed obvious was that both President Trump and Vice President Vance were keen to make some sort of points against President Zelenskyy, and they were waiting for an opportunity to criticize him, and that's what they did, and he tried to defend himself. And frankly, to those who say, well, President Zelenskyy should have been more deferential, he should have been more complimentary of President Trump and the United States. Well, this man is leading a nation that is under invasion. He has other things to think about than the most, perhaps the best kind of protocol in an event, at an event like this. He is defending his country against an invasion, and so we should cut him some slack if he's not the most diplomatic guest the White House has ever seen. And frankly, those of us who have the incredible fortune of living in countries that are not invaded by a neighbor or anybody else, we should show some generosity in spirit and indeed in finances and weapons to those countries that unfortunately have the misfortune of having been invaded. So the bottom line is, sure, Zelenskyy could have been more complimentary like President Macron was, like Prime Minister Starmer was, but he faced sudden verbal assault, and he did what I think any country's leader would have done under those circumstances, which is defend his country, because that country faces an existential threat.
Now, there are calls for Zelenskyy to resign or change his approach to the peace talks that the U.S. administration is trying to push for. Should Kyiv mend its ties with the United States? And if so, how exactly should it go about doing that?
Well, the problem with such calls is that, sure, Zelenskyy could resign tomorrow, but that doesn't guarantee full-fledged American support for Ukraine. President Trump may come, indeed, is likely to present various further demands further down the line that then whoever is leading Ukraine at that point, if President Zelenskyy were to resign, would then have to comply with or face similar threats of withdrawal of American support. So if your starting point is that your country, the other country, has to fully comply with my demands, or your leader has to resign, then the country facing such calls will never have any security, because your ostensible friend, the United States, may impose more conditions on you, and if you don't meet them, you will then be in further trouble. And I think the bottom line or the basis of intergovernmental relations is that each country, at least each democratic country, respects the other country's leadership.
Right, and with these calls for diplomacy, it seems like that was quite elusive yesterday, well, at least in my opinion. After being asked to leave the White House after this fiasco that we saw yesterday, Zelenskyy flew to London to attend the emergency summit hosted by Prime Minister Starmer on Sunday. That's still ahead of us, but he met with Starmer today. What is Prime Minister Starmer likely to advise Zelenskyy at this point, and what do you think is going to come out of this summit? Is the burden of Ukraine squarely now on European shoulders? Excuse me.
Well, it's certainly much more on European shoulders than it was 24 hours ago. But it was heartwarming, I think, for all of us watching the proceedings yesterday and again today, to see the enormous outpouring of support for Ukraine, for Zelenskyy, that came from European leaders the moment Zelenskyy had been de facto expelled from the White House, asked to leave the White House. European leaders virtually unanimously tweeted and otherwise communicated their support of Zelenskyy. And that is the right approach. You defend, I think a human instinct is to defend anybody who is being attacked. And Ukraine has been attacked by Russia. You don't beat up on the victim. And that is a human instinct, and it is also the instinct of democratic countries, has been the practice of democratic countries for a very long time, to defend countries that have been attacked by another country. And they did it once again yesterday and today, European leaders. And so when it comes to the summit in London, European leaders are likely to affirm that support. Now, of course, they have to come up with very practical measures to increase practical support of Ukraine, both financial and military, and that will be, as we all know, a very difficult challenge. But we should also remember that American support in military terms under President Trump hasn't been as strong as it was under Biden, and indeed in Biden's final months in office, the Republican-led Congress put constraints on U.S. support for Ukraine. So it hasn't been as extensive. The U.S. military support hasn't been as extensive as it was during the first year of the invasion. And the other thing to remember is that what we have seen from Europe is unusually strong, unanimous, indeed almost unanimous support of Ukraine. Europe is not folding. Europe is not dividing. Only a couple of leaders have strayed from that viewpoint that Ukraine needs to be defended. So that's a good starting point for the negotiations tomorrow.
This meeting, if we look at it as about a 45-minute press conference, it seemed to be going along very well, at least for a while, at least until President Zelenskyy asked J.D. Vance that question. Then things kind of went off the rails. So how difficult is it going to be now to correct the path? Because none of us expected it. It looked like it was going fine, and then obviously this completely went off track. So how difficult is it going to be for Ukraine to correct course at this time?
I think what we have seen in the almost 24 hours since this happened is that President Zelenskyy has tried to communicate with the American public. He went on Fox News only a couple of hours after that incident, and he was remarkably calm and tried to make his case to the American public. And it was remarkable, actually, to see that interview on Fox News. Fox, as we know, is generally an ardent defender and supporter of President Trump, but it was a very civilized interview. And the interviewer let President Zelenskyy finish his sentences and clearly express his thoughts. And I think Zelenskyy was successful in trying to communicate to the American public that Ukraine is fighting for its survival, and it's not just the moral and moral imperative for America to support Ukraine, but also it is in America's interest to do so. And so that's, I think, a good starting point for what will be a long process of mending ties. Now, we should remember that the relations between Trump and Zelenskyy were not particularly good to begin with. Trump has long resented Zelenskyy for refusing to comply with Trump's wishes to, in effect, implicate Hunter Biden. There was a very complicated case, but Trump has resented Zelenskyy ever since. So Zelenskyy was in an unenviable position. But the point is, I think he made his views clear to the American public and made a successful appeal to the American public for support.
Well, let's hope that this course can be corrected, and of course that we can get closer to peace talks. Elizabeth Brow, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.